Imagine not being able to read the paper because your hands were shaking. Imagine not being able to read newsprint as your world faded to black. The National Federation of the Blind, Newsline, Indiana. With your host, Lee Martin, and co-host, Florence Myers-McSwine.
We are back with the National Federation of the Blind show, Newsline, and we're here with our guest that we had last week, Ms. Bonnie Bomer, from the Disability Rights, Indiana Disability Rights. And Florence, I tell you, we enjoyed the show last week, and I'm sure that our viewing and listening audience did it as well.
It went wonderful, I think.
And so we want to talk a little bit about, introduce you as to what we are and who we are. We are the National Federation of the Blind, and the National Federation of the Blind has many services and programs. And one of the services that they have is called the National Federation of the Blind Newsline, which we have a show here in Indiana. And NFB Newsline is a free audio service that allows people that are blind, print challenged, and those with certain forms of dyslexia, even the deaf blind, to have access to reading newspapers, over 500 publications. We got newspapers, magazines, job listings, weather alerts, TV guide listings, Walmart and Target circulars that, you know, beforehand, Florence, we had no way of accessing this material. And this great service has allowed us now to have the freedom and independence to access so many services and magazines. Would you just give us a brief over the magazines?
Well, Lee, you know, I always want to start with AARP because you always remind me that I am a senior citizen, so I'll start with that one. But there's a plethora of magazines to choose from, and I'd say from AARP to Web and D. There's Reader's Digest for people who like reading basically a lot of everything. And with the magazines, newspapers, Lee, I love NFB Newsline because it keeps me in the know. It keeps me in the know of what's going on not only in my community, but what's going on across the nation. It keeps me in the know so that I can sit down and just hold a conversation about everything, because I love to read, not just the magazines. I love reading the newspapers as well as everything else that Newsline offers.
And those that are in the Indianapolis area and surrounding counties, you now can read the Indianapolis Star, you can read the Indianapolis Monthly, you can read the Indianapolis Recorder, you can have over 17 other newspapers and publications throughout the state of Indiana that you can read. You can also read international publications. So there's so much that you can read, so much that you can do, and you can also now use the new skill, the new Amazon Alexa skill. So we'll be talking more about that, and you'll watch our commercials, get all our information, and join that particular service, the National Federation of the Blind, Newsline, Indiana. And we'll be right back, so take care.
I love to read. I've always loved to read. Reading takes me places I'm not able to go by air, bus, or car. I plan on reading every newspaper Newsline has.
No more did I have to wonder about the rest of the story when disaster struck. I could open the local paper for that town and find out. And when I discovered that NFB Newsline could be a powerful tool for TV watching, listing all my favorite channels and what was on when, I was most definitely hooked.
I'm Danny Wayne Beamer, Program Manager of the Elder Blind Program at the Will Center in Terre Haute, Indiana. I introduced the NFB Newsline to seniors in 13 southwestern counties in Indiana. I also utilize the NFB Newsline for my radio station public affairs shows. The NFB Newsline. Experience it today.
Learn more by calling 855-963-6476 or visit nfbnewsline-in.org.
We are the nation's blind, and we read NFB Newsline.
If you or someone you know is visually impaired or print challenged, the National Federation of the Blind has a resource you need.
I use NFB Newsline when reading Hammond Northwest Times.
Using NFB Newsline, I read the Christian Science magazine.
Dad, you read Jerusalem Post too.
Learn more by calling 855-963-6476 or visit nfbnewsline-in.org.
Live the life you want. Read NFB Newsline.
It's free.
Well, welcome back to this segment of the National Federation of the Blind Newsline Indiana show. Again, we have our guest from last week, Miss Bonnie Bomer from Indiana Disability Rights. And Ms. Bomer, welcome back to our show.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here.
It is our pleasure to have you back. And I want to talk to you today about Employment First and its initiative. So, what information do you have for us today, Ms. Bomer?
Okay. The Employment First initiative started actually a number of years ago, and part of the initiative or part of the focus for starting that was looking at competitive integrated employment and how people with disabilities have tended to be segregated, often in sheltered workshops making way below sub-minimum wage. There's a federal program that allows them to do that, and we recognize that not everybody can be, they don't think everybody can be employed in the community, but the initiative, the folks involved in Employment First, believe that everyone is capable of community employment. It's just finding the right job, the right supports, and the right employer. So what we do, and what we've started doing here in the state, about probably between February and recently, we've had 11 town hall meetings around the state that involved over 400 people with disabilities and their families and advocates. And we've asked 2 questions at these town halls, 2 or 3 questions. One of those was, what are the barriers that you see for people with disabilities getting employment in your area? And what do you think we can do to get rid of some of those barriers? And then we had them actually, each group actually developed kind of an action plan. So here in Indianapolis, I was like the leader for the town hall meeting, and we developed a plan for looking at a number of barriers. In some areas, it might be transportation, access to affordable public transportation. In other areas, we were looking at getting employers on board with employing people with disabilities. Here in Indianapolis, we took several facets. We want to look at getting information to people about their rights as employees, how they can access reasonable accommodations at their jobs, how they can get reasonable accommodations even in the interview process. We want to give information about how employment affects people's benefits, whether it's Social Security or HUD benefits or whatever. We want to be able to provide that information to folks, how they can maintain their insurance, their Medicaid or Medicare or whatever insurance they have. We want to involve employers in the process of encouraging them to, helping people realize that people with disabilities offer a lot of skills and diversity and just originality to the workplace. And then we want to involve the community more in providing supports. So those are some of the things. I think we also were looking at the impact of the Medicaid waiver and how that's going to be redesigned, and there are a few other things. I know there's a lot, but that's what we're doing.
Okay. And Bonnie, now your clients, are they referred to you, or do you reach into the community and select clients through other agencies? How does that work?
I'm sorry,
for employment.
for Employment First?
Employment First, yes.
We are not employers. We're not placing people in employment. We are looking at the systemic barriers to employment. So what we're looking at is what situations out in the community are affecting people so they can't go to work. For example, if they don't have transportation and they work a night shift, open door doesn't work at night, what other options do they have? Personally, I use drivers, my own drivers. I also have used Uber. That's how I got here. But what other options are there for people with disabilities outside the paratransit system, and how can we make those systems work better for people? So those are some of the things we're looking at on a systemic level.
Well, we know here with paratransportation here in Indiana, particularly from our experiences here in Indianapolis, that it leaves less to be desired with the transportation. Oftentimes individuals are, picked up late, dropped off late. That gives a poor perception for employers. Also, we know that here throughout the country, there's a 70% unemployment rate of individuals with disabilities. Now, with the disability rights, you have a lot of individuals with different multiple disabilities that you represent, correct?
Yeah, we work with pretty much anyone across the disability scale and across ages. For example, individuals with disabilities can use vocational rehabilitation services to get employment. They actually do employment placement. What we do is advocacy to make sure that the systems are working right and people are communicating together. I think that the point of Employment First is trying to get, first of all, it's been legislated that we do look at employment as the first preferred outcome for people with disabilities, community integrated employment. And secondly, we're in the process of getting a governor's order to recognize that, so that the public entities involved in employment and working with people with disabilities are all collaborating to ensure that people have access to information and supports to become employed.
You know, that's really interesting, because I know on the flip side of that, there's a number of roundtables with people with disabilities trying to ensure some of the same things, so maybe we get on the same page. Now, aside from employment, you know that we talk about employment, but there, you know, we're kind of putting the cart before the horse. You know, we need to talk about training and preparing individuals that sometimes has been secluded and haven't been given the proper opportunities to be out into the communities due to the misperceptions of their conditions. Now, basically sheltered once again. Now, do disability rights work with training of individuals to get them to a level to where they can be employed on a competitive basis?
Okay, I'm going to be a little bit adversarial if I can. I don't think, I mean, I've seen people in shelter workshop programs that have been in quote unquote training for 20 years. I don't know if training is the correct term. I think we need to have people understand first of all, their rights, and second of all, they need to have informed choice, which means that they need to have the information to make a good choice about where they want to work, where they want to live, etc. Under the Workforce Investment Opportunities Act, WIOA, which was passed a few years ago, one of the things is that vocational rehab has to go to all the sheltered workshops and meet with the people, find out if that's where they want to remain, do some assessments, and then determine if there are other options available for them, and then give them that information so they can make those informed choices.
Okay.
That's a little bit of new news, yeah.
But still, I'm looking at the student that's graduating from high school or even getting a certificate.
Okay.
Okay,
That's a little
and
different.
we're talking about education and training.
Okay.
Now, you do have adults that may have been placed into a training or a shelter workshop for 20 years or more, but how did they get there? Did they not have the proper tools, the proper training, the proper education to elevate them to a higher job source?
Sometimes people are placed there by their families because they think that's the only option available to them. Sometimes the providers who, where they live in maybe in congregate settings or group homes, they might require people to go to these sheltered workshops. So it kind of depends on where the individual's coming from. Under, again, that same law I mentioned, WIOA, there's an initiative to try to work with transitioning youth, kids that are coming out of high school, to help them look at employment options, look at whether or not they need to go to post-secondary education, go to college, whether they need to go to a training program. They want to maybe be a carpenter, so they need to go to a training program to do that. All those things are available through the Work One centers, the job centers, and through the vocational rehab services. So those are options that are out there. And we want students and parents in high school, and before if possible, to start looking at where's this individual going to live and work and socialize and just be part of the community.
Mm-hmm. Well, we're going to take a short break, and when we come back, we're going to talk a little bit more. I know you've been hearing the word shelter workshop, and we're going to talk about, just a little bit about the shelter workshops and some of the other programs that we know that are going on for our students here in the state of Indiana. So stay tuned.
With my failing eyesight, I'm not able to read regular newspapers, and I'm not able to keep up with obituaries.
I've been a homemaker all of my life, but since my vision has failed, I wish I could read my favorite magazines.
Have you heard of the NFB Newsline?
Learn more by calling 855-963-6476 or visit nfbnewsline-in.org.
Subscribe free to NFB Newsline today.
We are the nation's blind, and we read NFB Newsline.
As I travel the nation, I read NFB Newsline.
I live in Valparaiso, Indiana, and I listen to my local news on NFB Newsline.
As a student, I enjoy reading current events on NFB Newsline.
Learn more by calling 855-963-6476 or visit nfbnewsline-in.org.
Subscribe free to NFB Newsline today.
Welcome back to our National Federation of the Blind Newsline Indiana show with our guest today, again, Ms. Bonnie Bomer from Disability Rights. And we were talking earlier about initiatives through Disability Rights, and we spoke about shelter workshops, and let's talk more about that.
Okay. One of the initiatives or one of the focuses that Employment First has, which is not really part of Indiana Disability Rights. It's kind of a collaborative effort between a whole bunch of state agencies and educational facilities. But one of the things we are, of course, we're looking at is transition planning, making sure that students in high school, and even before high school, junior high even, and their parents and their educators can sit down and start planning where this person's going to live, where they're going to work, what kinds of supports they're going to need to be successful in a community, and just a variety of things that most people take for granted that have to be planned when you have a disability. So you might have to consider where the person wants to go. This person might want to have their own psychology practice. Okay, what do they need to do that? Well, in Indiana, they need to have a PhD to be in private practice as a psychologist. So they have to go through education. They have to plan where they're going to go and how they're going to get there. They have to map out the route. They can do that through transition planning in high school, starting it and then going through their life plan. One of the things that we're looking at under the idea of employment first is what community supports are out there to encourage people with disabilities to be employed. For example, we've reached out to the Indianapolis Chamber of Commerce. And what we're trying to do is bring employers together so we can do a forum with them and find out what their perceptions of employment for people with disabilities are and help them learn how their company can be strengthened and improved by the diversity offered by people with disabilities. Another thing we want to do is, or we are working on, is getting information out to people with disabilities on how employment will affect their Social Security benefits and other benefits. We want to do some webinars and offer information on how working affects your insurance, how working affects, as I said, your benefits. Another thing we'd like to do is provide information to folks on reasonable accommodations. What is that? How do you request these things? What are reasonable accommodations? They're basically changes in the way work is done so that a person with disabilities can basically what it does is allows people to still do the essential functions of their job, but maybe they have a little different way of doing that. Maybe there's a change in the policy. No pets allowed in this store. Well, if I want to work in that store as a clerk and I use a service dog, is there a way of changing that policy so that my dog's allowed to be there? Things like that. We want to just offer education to individuals with disabilities, their families, and their advocates so that they know what's available and how they can be benefited by being employed. First of all, you don't have to live in poverty. It's a huge benefit.
That's true. Now, what I'm hearing you say then, planning is essential.
Absolutely.
Yes. There's a saying, if you fail to plan, then you plan to fail. And with what you're doing, advocating for youth, do you go to schools occasionally and speak to counselors on behalf of students as well? Or how do you apply your services or agency services?
Vocational rehabilitation services is mandated to use a percentage of its funding to reach out to provide pre-employment training services to students with disabilities. So they're going out into schools and making sure they're offering counseling and advice to students. We work a lot in our education team through Indiana Disability Rights. We help with the conferences, the planning conferences for the individualized education plans. My particular team, I work more with the adults, but I have worked with students who are in post-secondary training and are running into some barriers. So we do a kind of a wide range approach to that.
Well, so you guys have been around for quite some time. You know how long disability rights have been in Indiana?
Actually, there's a story. Back in like the 70s, this guy named Geraldo Rivera went around and did an expose on some of, it was a state hospital called Willowbrook, a psychiatric hospital. It also housed mostly people with developmental disabilities, and found out about the shocking conditions under which those people lived and were treated. As a result, Congress developed the protection and advocacy system for people with developmental disabilities, and then expanded it across disabilities to include pretty much everybody. And we have like 8 or 9 federal grants that allow us to provide services here in Indiana. We've been around since the mid-70s.
Wow, and I think that was in Newcastle, if I'm not correct. I'm not thinking that particular unit was in Newcastle.
That was originally in New York, New York State.
New York State. There was one here in Indiana.
And yes, they did exposés on several. I know they did one in Michigan on some of the treatment centers there. Mm-hmm. And across the country, the systems were appalling. You know, people were, I can't even describe how bad the treatment was. Mm-hmm. One of the first things that we did as the protection and advocacy system across the country was start working on abuse and neglect. So that's our biggie is abuse and neglect. Okay. Basically making sure that people are safe.
Safe. Well, I'll tell you what, we're going to take a short pause, and you know, it's been very exciting talking with you, and we're going to come up with our conclusion of our show. And we'll be right back in less than a minute.
The National Federation of the Blind knows that blindness is not the characteristic that defines you or your future. Every day we raise the expectations of blind people because low expectations create obstacles between blind people and our dreams. You can live the life you want. Blindness is not what holds you back.
Well, welcome to the conclusion of today's National Federation of the Blind Newsline Indiana show. We've had a wonderful show with our guest today, Ms. Bonnie Bomer from Disability Rights. And Bonnie, is there anything that you would like to leave with our listening audience?
Sure, I can leave our contact information. We may be contacted toll-free at 1-800-622-4845. We also have, of course, a website and Facebook presence. You can look for us under Indiana Disability Rights. And we have, on our website, we have an application or a form that you can fill out if you need our services.
Okay, well, we want to thank you once again for joining us, and we'll see you next week on the NFB Newsline Indiana show.
The National Federation of the Blind, Newsline, Indiana. For more information, go to nfb-in.org or call 855-963-6476. That's 855-963-6476. The National Federation of the Blind encourages you to live the life you want.